She was just 6 years old. Wearing rubber gloves that swallowed her hands, she quietly cleaned office floors late at night. Unseen, unheard, forgotten. Until one night, a millionaire CEO walked in and noticed her. What he found out would turn his world upside down. This little girl cleaned an office until a millionaire CEO noticed her and learned why. And once he asked her one simple question, everything changed. This is another powerful story from Rod Stories, where real emotions make you stop and think about life. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Gabriel Sutton had no reason to believe anyone would be in his office at that hour. His meetings were over, his staff long gone, and even the night shift janitorial crew rarely came up to the executive floors before midnight. He stepped out of the elevator onto the 40th floor of Sutton & Vale's Chicago headquarters, eyes glued to his phone. Skimming through messages he didn't care to answer. He moved with the weary rhythm of someone used to working past exhaustion, ready to grab the contract he'd forgotten and head home. But as he pushed open the door to his corner office, he stopped cold. There, crouched near the floor-to-ceiling windows, was a child, a little girl. She looked about 6, wearing a baggy blue jumpsuit and oversized yellow rubber gloves that swallowed her hands. She was scrubbing the tile with a sponge, her small body bent in focus, like the act itself was keeping her alive. He stared, waiting for the vision to fade, thinking maybe his mind had finally cracked under pressure, but she didn't disappear. She just kept scrubbing, unaware or uncaring that someone was watching. He stepped closer, unsure whether to speak, afraid that words might shatter the surreal stillness in the room. But when the girl finally looked up, startled but not scared, he saw her face. Her skin was a rich brown, and her hair was tied into a fraying braid that dangled down her back. Her eyes, soft and solemn, didn't carry fear, only fatigue. "What are you doing here?" Gabriel asked, his voice low but sharp. The girl blinked and looked back at the floor, her hand pausing over a dark mark on the tile. "I'm cleaning," she said quietly. "You're just a child," he said, louder now, disbelief hardening his tone. "Why are you cleaning?" She didn't flinch. Her voice remained steady. "Because I have to. I stay with my aunt. She says I have to help if I want to stay." Gabriel's breath caught in his throat. His world was contracts and concrete. But this wasn't business. This was a little girl being used as free labor at the edge of midnight. It made no sense. And yet, there she was, real as the marble under her knees. He crouched down, eye level now, and took in every small detail. The frayed fabric at her sleeves, the cloudy water in the plastic bucket beside her, the way she sat on her heels like someone twice her age. "What's your name?" he asked, softer this time. "Naya," she answered. "Naya Carter." He repeated the name silently as he stood trying to place it. It wasn't familiar. "Who let you in?" he asked. "My aunt works here," she replied. "She said I could help tonight. Said if I do a good job, she won't make me sleep in the hallway again." Gabriel's fists clenched, the kind of anger rising in him that no boardroom ever provoked. There were rules, there were protections, there were lines that people weren't supposed to cross, and someone had left this little girl here to clean floors like a ghost no one was supposed to see. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "Get me building security," he said, not bothering to explain. Then he looked at Nia again, standing now with the sponge dangling from one hand. "You're not going back with her. Not tonight." Security arrived in minutes, confused until they saw the girl. Then they went quiet. Gabriel ordered them to bring him the roster of all janitorial staff on duty. They found Helena Carter's name. Within the hour, she was removed from the building, still trying to explain that it was just one night, that she had no choice, that the kid needed to learn. Gabriel didn't listen. He didn't care. What mattered was that Nia had been left there like she was disposable. When security asked what to do with the child, he didn't hesitate long. "She's not going to a shelter," he said. "She's coming with me." It was reckless, and he knew it. He could already hear his legal team warning him about liability, public relations disasters, scandal. But he didn't care. He couldn't unsee what he'd seen. A child bent over a sponge in his billion-dollar office, acting like that was her only way to survive. He looked at her again. She was standing still, waiting, not crying, not asking questions, just waiting, as if she'd done this before. And in that moment he realized something had cracked open inside him. Something he hadn't even known was still breakable. The ride home was silent. Gabriel didn't speak. Nia didn't ask where they were going. She sat quietly in the back of his black SUV, legs swinging off the edge of the leather seat, fingers pressed together like she was holding herself in place. She didn't look out the window or at him. She just sat, still and small. Gabriel found himself watching her in the rearview mirror, wondering what kind of life made a 6-year-old act like a guest in her own skin. He didn't know what he was doing, not really. He'd built skyscrapers, negotiated billion-dollar deals, survived lawsuits and public feuds. But this wasn't logic or profit. It wasn't a calculated risk. It was instinct. Something human, primal even, that wouldn't let him leave her behind. He had no plan, no script, just the image of that little girl on her knees, and the overwhelming certainty that walking away from her would be the same as walking away from the last piece of himself he still believed in. When they arrived at his penthouse, the doorman glanced at the girl but didn't ask questions. Gabriel led Nia through the lobby and into the private elevator. She followed without hesitation, her footsteps light against the floor. Once inside, he showed her to the guest bedroom. Simple, clean, barely used. "This will be your room," he said. "If you need anything, knock. I'll be right across the hall." She nodded once and walked in. No hesitation, no questions. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap. "Thank you," she said, almost a whisper. He blinked, surprised by how composed she was. "You're welcome," he replied. She didn't say another word. He left the room, closing the door gently behind him. For a long moment he stood in the hallway, staring at nothing, heart pounding with something he didn't recognize. Then he walked to the kitchen, poured himself a drink, and looked out at the city he thought he'd mastered. But tonight, something was different. For the first time in years, someone had crossed the threshold of his solitude. A child, a stranger. And yet, she had changed everything. Gabriel woke up earlier than usual, not because of an alarm, but because something had shifted in his home. The silence was still there, but it no longer felt like his. It was the presence of someone else, quiet but undeniable, filling the space between thoughts. He got dressed out of habit, shirt half tucked in, mind already turning over everything that could go wrong with what he'd done. A stranger's child was in his guest room. No calls had been made, no authorities informed. He hadn't even drafted a plan. Yet there she was, behind a closed door, sleeping or not on the bed he hadn't thought about in years. As he crossed the hall, he heard the faintest creak and found Nia standing there in the doorway. Same jumpsuit from the night before, hair slightly messier, eyes just as clear. "Good morning," he said, unsure if he was supposed to say more. "Good morning," she echoed softly, then added nothing else. She didn't ask for food, didn't seem confused or afraid. She simply stood there like this was a routine she already knew how to follow. And something about that chilled him more than anything else. In the kitchen, Gabriel made scrambled eggs for the first time in maybe a decade. He hadn't cooked for anyone since college. A chef delivered his meals 3 times a week, everything portioned and labeled. But this morning he cracked the eggs himself, burned one, and started over. Nia sat at the counter without a word, feet dangling above the stool bar, hands in her lap. When he placed the plate in front of her, she said, "Thank you," then ate slowly, each bite small and careful. He watched her more than he watched the food. She didn't slouch, didn't fidget, didn't reach for anything without permission. It wasn't discipline, it was training. He recognized it because it mirrored the kind he had learned as a boy in the system. Be invisible, be useful, be quiet. She didn't even look up until she had finished every bite. Then she neatly folded the napkin on the counter and asked, "Where should I put my plate?" He told her to leave it, and she nodded without protest. No mess, no demands, just that eerie, practiced silence. Gabriel tried to work from home that day, but nothing came easily. His eyes skimmed over blueprints and budgets, but his mind stayed stuck on that small figure across the hall. He peeked into the guest room mid-morning, expecting to find her napping or playing, but she was sitting cross-legged on the floor, quietly reading a book one of the housekeepers must have left. She looked up, met his gaze, and asked, "Is it okay if I read in here?" He nodded, caught off guard again. "You can go anywhere you want." But she didn't move. She stayed there, contained, like stepping outside the room might break an unspoken rule. Gabriel didn't press her. Instead, he closed the door and leaned against the hallway wall, head tilted back, trying to breathe through the guilt that had begun coiling inside him. He couldn't make sense of how calm she was, how much of her childhood had been stripped away and replaced with this survival reflex. He could feel it radiating off her, not fear, but readiness, like she'd already learned the world wasn't a place to be vulnerable in, and that knowledge sat heavy in his chest. By the third day, Gabriel had made calls. He contacted Jordan Wells, his most trusted legal advisor, and asked him to look into the process for emergency guardianship. Jordan asked why, sounding surprised. Gabriel had never expressed any interest in children, much less parenthood. Gabriel gave no explanation, just instructions. "I need everything filed by end of day. Every document, every step, I want to be ready." Jordan agreed without further questions, sensing the weight behind the request. Gabriel didn't tell him what haunted him most, the way Nia moved through his home like she didn't belong, like she expected to be erased at any moment. No child should move like that. No child should learn to take up less space to be allowed to stay. It wasn't just about protecting her. It was about undoing something in himself, too. She stirred things in him that had been buried under years of discipline, wealth, and control. He couldn't stop seeing that little girl in his office with her gloves on, cleaning the floor like she owed the world something. He could still feel that image slicing into him, sharp and irreversible. Even with lawyers involved, Gabriel kept his schedule flexible. He canceled 2 meetings and worked remotely, something he never did. He stayed close, watched Nia without hovering, listened without interrogating. She remained consistent, woke early, made her bed perfectly, always asked before touching anything. One afternoon, he caught her hesitating at the edge of the living room, as if waiting to be invited in. He gestured for her to come sit and handed her a small sketch pad and pencils. She drew quietly, her lines tentative but neat. A house, a window, a small girl inside. He didn't ask what it meant. He didn't need to. That night, as he was shutting down his computer, he passed by her room and saw her brushing her teeth without being told, using the little stool someone had placed in the bathroom for her. She saw him in the mirror and said, "I brushed and washed my hands. Do you want to check?" He paused, throat tight. "No need," he said. "I trust you." Her eyes widened slightly. Then she nodded and returned to brushing. No child should be surprised by trust. As he lay awake later that night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, Gabriel tried to process what was happening. He didn't feel overwhelmed. He didn't feel trapped. What he felt was something more dangerous. Hope. It had been years since he'd allowed that feeling to enter his life. Everything about Nia pierced through the version of himself he had spent so long perfecting. The controlled executive, the emotionally distant man who kept everything orderly and predictable. She was a child, but she carried herself like someone who'd already learned not to count on kindness. That fact gutted him, and more than anything, it made him want to do something he didn't fully understand. Protect her, hold space for her, give her permission to exist without condition. He knew he had only taken the first step by bringing her home. The real fight, legally, emotionally, was still ahead. But one thing was already clear. Nia had learned never to be a burden. And Gabriel, for reasons he couldn't yet explain, had no intention of letting her carry that alone anymore. It was just after 3 in the morning when Gabriel heard the soft thud against the wall. He sat up, heart kicking harder, trying to place the sound. A second later, it came again, lighter but steady. He stepped into the hallway and saw Nia's bedroom door cracked open. Inside, the light was off, but she was curled up on the rug, not in her bed, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her breathing was fast, uneven, like she had run miles in her sleep. He crouched beside her without speaking, letting her feel his presence before saying anything. Her eyes were open but unfocused, blinking back tears she was too proud to let fall. "Did you have a nightmare?" he asked gently. She nodded once. "Do you want to talk about it?" Silence. Then, a whisper. "She was yelling. Said I had to scrub the stairs before I could eat." I didn't have gloves, my hands hurt. Gabriel's stomach turned and his jaw tensed, but he kept his voice steady. You're safe now. No one is going to make you do that ever again. Not while I'm here. That's when she looked at him, like she was trying to believe him but didn't know how. Gabriel sat with her on the floor until her breathing slowed. He didn't rush her back to bed. Instead, he waited until she moved on her own, crawled under the covers without asking for help, and curled into a ball as if that shape protected her from memories. When he returned to his own room, he didn't sleep. He sat at the edge of the bed, hands clasped, staring into the dark, replaying the sound of her voice. Small, broken, and too old for 6. He recognized that voice. Not hers exactly, but what it meant. He had once spoken like that too, a long time ago, when he was just another forgotten name in the foster system. It was a voice that had already decided no one was coming, and now it lived in her. That realization struck him in a place he thought had gone numb years ago. She wasn't just scared, she was used to being scared, used to pain, used to silence, and he hated that he understood so easily. That understanding lit something in him. Not pity, not guilt, but determination. He wouldn't let her learn the rest of what he had. He would stop it now, before she crossed the same point of no return. The next morning, Gabriel called Jordan again and told him to begin preparing the petition for legal guardianship. Permanent? Jordan asked. Yes, Gabriel said. No delays. I want the paperwork started today. He knew the legal path would be complicated. Interviews, court dates, evaluations. But it didn't matter. What mattered was making sure no one could take her away from him. Not the state. Not the aunt. Not anyone who thought she was a burden. After ending the call, he walked into the living room where Nia was drawing quietly at the table. She looked up when she saw him and gave a small smile. Do you need something? She asked. The question hit him square in the chest. She was still trying not to take up space. No, he said. But I was thinking we could go out for a bit. Just the two of us. She didn't answer right away. Out where? Somewhere you choose. That made her pause, like the concept didn't register. Choose. Kids were supposed to be indecisive, chaotic, impulsive. But Nia looked at him as if he had asked her to walk on water. He waited, patient. Finally, she nodded. They arrived at a large children's store tucked between 2 towering office buildings. Gabriel watched as Nia hesitated at the entrance, her small hand tightening around the sleeve of his coat. He kneeled down beside her. You're allowed to be here, he said quietly. You can touch anything. Look at everything. She nodded but didn't move right away. When they stepped inside, she walked close to him, almost pressed against his side. As they wandered through the aisles filled with toys, books, clothes, and shelves lined with things meant to bring joy, Gabriel noticed how little her eyes sparkled. She didn't run to anything. Didn't point, didn't smile wide like most kids would. Instead, she moved carefully, like one wrong touch might get her scolded or kicked out. He hated that. Hated how much of her childhood had been wrapped in conditions. When they passed the book section, her steps slowed. She tilted her head toward a shelf lined with illustrated hardcovers and stopped. Gabriel watched her eyes linger on one, a collection of classic fairy tales with golden stars across the cover. You want that one? He asked. She looked up, hesitant. Can I really? Anything you want, he said. Then just that one. At the register, the cashier smiled down at Nia and asked, Is that your favorite? Nia only nodded, clutching the book with both hands like it might vanish if she blinked. Gabriel didn't interrupt. He let her have that moment, silent but full. On the drive home, she kept the book in her lap, running her fingers along the cover, tracing the stars one by one. She didn't open it. Not yet. But he knew she would when she was ready. At home, she placed the book on her nightstand like it was something sacred. He stood in her doorway for a second, watching. She caught him looking but didn't say anything, just gave a small nod, and he returned it. Later that night, Gabriel poured himself a glass of water and sat in his study, thinking about everything he hadn't done in his life, families he never started, connections he never made, risks he never took outside the boardroom. But tonight, he had taken one, a real one. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt necessary. As he walked past her room before going to bed, He paused and looked in once more. The book was open now, resting on her chest as she slept. She didn't stir as he watched her sleep. The book slid slightly as her chest rose and fell, and he stepped quietly inside to lift it and place it gently on the nightstand. He tucked the blanket higher over her shoulder, and for a moment, just stood there, watching. She looked different when she slept, less guarded, less ready to run. He wondered how many nights she'd slept light, waiting to be woken up by shouting, by punishment, by cold. Whatever the number, he intended to put distance between those nights and the ones ahead. She wouldn't have to scrub another floor for approval. She wouldn't have to earn warmth or peace. Not anymore. When he left her room, he felt the weight of that promise settle fully onto him. Not as a burden, but as a choice. And it was one he would make again, without hesitation. That night, he went to sleep knowing that no matter what the system said, or what hoops he had to jump through, he would fight for her. She had chosen just one book from a store full of things, but it was enough, because it meant she had started to believe this life might really be hers. Gabriel had just finished reviewing a final draft for a redevelopment proposal when his assistant patched a call through. Her voice was stiff, a tone she only used when something serious was happening. "There's a woman on the line from the Department of Child and Family Services," she said. Gabriel sat up straighter, the muscles in his neck tightening. The call was brief, clinical. The woman introduced herself as Ms. Delaney and informed him that a formal report had been filed regarding the presence of a minor, Nia Carter, currently in his care. An anonymous source had flagged the situation as irregular, triggering a mandatory in-home welfare check scheduled for the following day. Gabriel didn't ask who had reported it. He knew it didn't matter. What mattered was that someone had questioned what he already feared the system would reject, that a billionaire with no prior parenting experience had taken in a child with no official paperwork and no blood relation. After the call ended, he sat frozen, the folder on his desk forgotten. He had built a life based on control, of people, markets, outcomes. And yet now, with one phone call, everything he had begun building with Nia felt like it was under threat. He contacted Jordan immediately, voice clipped and direct. "I need every piece of paperwork filed. Guardianship, background checks, whatever else they'll ask for. Expedite it. Pull every string we have." Jordan tried to calm him, remind him that a visit didn't equal removal. But Gabriel didn't want reassurance. He wanted certainty. After hanging up, he paced his office, going over every conversation, every moment since Nia entered his life. Had he been too slow in acting? Too impulsive? Was this his fault? The thought of her being taken away, of returning to whatever darkness she had been pulled from, made his chest ache in a way nothing else ever had. That night, he didn't mention the visit to Nia. She'd had enough uncertainty for one childhood. Still, she seemed to sense something. During dinner, she watched him carefully, as if trying to decode what he wasn't saying. Her fork hovered mid-air. "You're quiet," she said. Gabriel tried to smile. "Just a lot on my mind." She didn't press. She never did. But later, after brushing her teeth and slipping into her pajamas, she stood in the doorway to his office, not entering, just watching. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" she asked. The question stopped him cold. He looked up from the screen, eyes meeting hers across the room. "Yes," he said, voice steady. "I'll be here." She nodded once, but before walking away, she added something so small and heavy it hit him like a punch. "I'll be here too." He didn't sleep well that night. He kept checking the clock, counting down the hours until the visit. By morning, his nerves were wired, but he masked it behind the same calm he wore to board meetings and investor calls. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the knock came. He opened the door to a woman in her 40s, clipboard tucked under her arm, hair pinned precisely. "Ms. Delaney" introduced herself again and asked to see the child. Gabriel called for Nia, who appeared quietly, holding the fairy tale book in one hand and her stuffed fox in the other. She greeted Ms. Delaney with a soft hello and sat where instructed, eyes alert but calm. The caseworker's questions were polite but cutting. "Where were you before this? Has anyone ever hurt you? Do you feel safe here?" Nia answered each one with careful honesty, her voice only shaking once when asked, "What would you do if you had to leave?" She lowered her gaze and said, "I'd try to be small again so no one gets mad." Gabriel clenched his fists, barely keeping himself from interrupting. Ms. Delaney made notes and left as efficiently as she had arrived, offering no comment about what she thought or what would come next. As soon as the elevator doors closed behind her, Gabriel walked back inside, jaw locked. He called Jordan again and demanded updates, not process. "I don't want timelines. I want confirmation," he said. "I want my name on her forms, fast." That afternoon, after things had calmed slightly, he sat Nia down in the living room and told her the truth. Carefully, gently, he explained that someone had reported their arrangement and that a judge would now decide if she could stay. She didn't react at first, just listened. "Will they take me?" she asked. "I won't let them," Gabriel said. Her hands tightened around the fox. "Even if they try?" "Yes," he said. "Even then." She nodded slowly, but her shoulders remained tense. She had no reason to believe in guarantees. Too many of her promises had come broken. That night, he watched her fall asleep faster than he expected, probably exhausted from pretending all day that she wasn't scared. He sat by the window, drink in hand, watching the clouds gather above the skyline and thinking, for the first time in years, that all his power might not be enough. The next morning brought confirmation from Jordan. The emergency guardianship hearing had been scheduled for the following week. Gabriel should have felt relief, but instead, he felt the weight of each day that stood between now and then. Nothing was final. Nothing was safe. Nia didn't ask about the hearing, didn't count down the days, but Gabriel could see it in the way she studied him more closely, listened to every word like it might be her last chance to remember it. He tried to keep their routines normal. Breakfast, quiet mornings drawing at the kitchen table, but the fear hovered beneath everything. One evening as Nia colored quietly beside him, she asked without looking up, "If they don't let me stay, will you still think about me?" The question shattered whatever composure he had left. He moved to her side, knelt beside her, and took her small hand in his. "Nia," he said, "there isn't a version of my life where I forget you." Her lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She just nodded and leaned into his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, not saying another word. She didn't need more words. She needed the promise behind them, and she needed it to be real. That night, Gabriel sat in his office long after Nia had gone to bed, staring at her drawing on the coffee table, a sketch of a tall building with a small girl in one window and a man standing on the ground looking up. In the picture, they were both smiling. He traced the lines with his eyes, memorizing them, anchoring himself in what he was fighting for. It wasn't just a legal battle. It was personal, visceral. She had become part of his day in ways he hadn't realized until the threat of losing her appeared. She was his first thought in the morning, and his last before bed. She was the quiet voice in the hallway, the pair of small shoes by the door, the presence that had made his penthouse feel like something close to home. The hearing was coming. He didn't know how it would unfold or what the court would decide, but he knew one thing with certainty. He wasn't going to let her disappear. Not now, not ever. The emergency guardianship hearing was marked on his calendar in bold red, and everything between that day and the court date would be lived with one goal in mind, proving that she belonged. The hearing didn't look the way Gabriel expected it to. No press, no crowd, no polished panel of decision-makers. Just a room, plain and muted, with a judge seated behind a desk, a guardian ad litem, a caseworker, and a single lawyer representing Gabriel. He sat in his tailored suit, every detail of his appearance perfect, his version of armor. Beside him, Nia sat in a dark green dress with tiny silver buttons, the one Lydia had laid out that morning. Her shoes barely touched the floor. Her hand rested in his, small but steady. The judge addressed Gabriel first. Questions about income, residence, stability, the basics. He answered all of them with calm precision, every word carefully measured. He had practiced with his attorney for days, but none of it felt real until the judge turned toward Nia and asked the one question no one else could answer for her. "Can you tell me in your own words where you'd like to live?" The room went still. Gabriel looked at her without prompting, silently letting her speak for herself. She glanced down at her lap, then up at the judge, and then finally at Gabriel. "I want to stay with him," she said, "because when I was alone I didn't feel real, but when he talks to me, I feel like I exist, like I matter. The moment held, breathless and suspended, until the judge nodded and wrote something quietly. No dramatic declaration, no ceremonial gavel, just words spoken gently. This court grants temporary guardianship to Mr. Gabriel Sutton, pending full evaluation and continued review. Gabriel exhaled for the first time in hours. He looked down at Nia, and she looked back at him like she wasn't quite sure what had just happened, but believed it must be good if his shoulders had finally dropped. They left the building hand in hand. No media, no applause, just a shared silence that meant more than any celebration could. That night, he let her choose dinner and read her favorite story twice. She didn't ask again what the judge had said. She didn't have to. She understood in the way only a child who's lived too many goodbyes can understand, by feeling what stayed instead of what was said. But just as the tension from the courtroom started to loosen its grip, something unexpected arrived to take its place. 3 days later, Gabriel's assistant entered his office without knocking, her face pale and uncertain. "There's a woman here," she said. "She says she's Nia's biological mother." The name on the woman's ID was Emily Monroe. Gabriel stared at her through the glass of the conference room, unsure what to feel. She looked worn, her eyes tired, her body thin but composed. She didn't come in raging or begging. She sat down with her hands folded tightly in front of her voice quiet but clear. "I'm not here to take her," she said. "I just want to see her, to talk to her if she'll let me." Gabriel didn't respond immediately. He studied her, looking for signs of deception, but what he saw instead was a woman unraveling carefully, holding herself together with string and guilt. She explained everything: addiction, rehab, the years she lost, the shame that kept her from coming back sooner. "I've been clean for 14 months. I have a job, a place to stay. I'm not trying to take her from you. I just want a chance to speak to her. One meeting, with you there." Gabriel didn't agree then and there. He told her he'd need to talk to Nia first, and she nodded. She didn't push. That night, sitting in the living room, he explained it to Nia the same way, carefully, honestly, without hiding or sugarcoating. Nia didn't cry. She didn't scream or break. She sat beside him on the couch and listened like she always did, with her whole self. When he finished, she asked one thing: "Does she want me to live with her now?" Gabriel shook his head immediately. "No, she just wants to talk to you, only if you want to." Nia went quiet, her gaze fixed on the carpet. Then she looked up. "Can you come with me?" Gabriel nodded. "Of course." The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon, held at a neutral space with a licensed counselor present. Nia clung to Gabriel's sleeve on the way in, and he kept her close. When Emily entered, she didn't run to her daughter or try to embrace her. She sat down slowly, eye level, and just looked at her. "You're taller than I remember," she said, voice trembling but not breaking. Nia didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. Emily spoke for a long time, not in desperation but in remorse. She talked about the choices she made, the ones she didn't, and how none of it had to do with not loving her. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for anything. And when she finished, there was a long silence between them. Finally, Nia whispered, "I don't remember your voice." Emily's shoulders sank, but she nodded. "That's okay. Maybe one day you will." The ride home was quiet. Gabriel didn't push her to talk. He didn't ask how she felt or what she thought. He just let her sit in it, knowing that sometimes silence was the only space where real things settled. But as they pulled into the garage, just as he was about to turn off the engine, Nia spoke. Her voice was small, but sure. "Will you still be my dad even if I talk to her sometimes?" Gabriel turned to her immediately, every wall inside him falling. "Always," he said. "That will never change." She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. She leaned over and rested her head against his arm. And that was her answer. He didn't move for a long time, just sat there, letting her presence settle back into his life like it had never left, like nothing could undo what had been built between them. Not biology, not paperwork, not time. In that single question and his answer, something was sealed. Nia asked if Gabriel would still be her dad even if she talked to her mom, and he said, "Always." The final guardianship hearing was quiet, almost anticlimactic. Gabriel had spent weeks preparing for it, papers signed, evaluations submitted, home visits completed. But when the judge finally looked up from the last page of the report and granted him permanent legal custody of Nia Carter, there was no dramatic moment, no swell of applause, just a sentence spoken clearly and calmly. Full guardianship is granted to Mr. Gabriel Sutton. Nia held his hand the entire time, wearing a blue dress she had picked out herself, her silver bracelet glinting under the lights. When the words were spoken, she didn't cry or smile wide. She just looked up at him with a quiet certainty, as if the weight she'd carried for years had finally been set down. That night, Gabriel didn't throw a party or open a bottle of champagne. Instead, he took Nia out for ice cream, and they sat in the car afterward, laughing about which flavor was better. It felt like enough. But something inside Gabriel told him it wasn't. Not for the other kids out there. Not for the ones who were still invisible like Nia had once been. He had the means. He had the motivation. And now he had a name for what he wanted to build. He found the building by chance, a decommissioned community center in South Chicago, once used for after-school programs, but abandoned for years. It was run down but structurally sound, tucked between a quiet row of houses and a school. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He purchased it that same week and began the process of transforming it. He named it the Carter Center, not just after Nia, but for what her name had come to mean: survival, presence, value. This place wouldn't be a shelter. It would be a starting point, a space for children who had been passed around, spoken over, ignored, a place where they could be reminded of their worth before the world tried to erase it. Gabriel poured himself into the project, as he had with his company, but this time, the purpose felt different. It didn't revolve around profits or projections. It revolved around children like Nia, and the thousands like her he'd never meet. He included her in every step: color palettes, furniture choices, book selections. And Nia didn't just observe, she participated. She picked out the stars for the reading room walls, chose bean bags in her favorite shades, and helped stack books in neat rows. She was building it with him, piece by piece. Opening day came faster than expected. Gabriel kept it small on purpose. No media, no speeches, just a soft launch with volunteers, a few friends, and a handful of families invited quietly through local support networks. Nia wore a white dress with soft blue trim and clutched her fairy tale book as she led a group of children through the halls. Gabriel stayed back, watching her move from room to room, explaining what each space was for. "This is the art room. You don't have to be good at it, just honest," she told a shy boy holding a crayon too tightly. "Here's the book room," she said to another girl. "You can read out loud, or in your head, or just hold the book if you want." In the back, she showed them the kindness closet, a room filled with donated clothes, toiletries, and school supplies, free to anyone who needed them. No one had to ask. No one had to explain. It was just there, a safety net that didn't require shame. Gabriel watched her speak, her voice soft but firm, and realized he wasn't watching a child anymore. He was watching someone who had found her voice and now offered it to others. At the end of the tour, the children gathered in the main room. Nia stood in front of them, the center's new sign hanging above her. She held her book tightly and looked around the room. No script, no prompting, just a pause, and then, "I know what it feels like to be nobody," she said, "but this place is for people who need to remember they're somebody." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They landed with weight, with clarity, and the room stayed quiet, not out of awkwardness, but respect. Gabriel didn't move. He didn't clap or speak. He just looked at her and felt something shift again. Every building he had ever constructed had been for investors, markets, cities. This one was for her, and for the kids she hadn't even met yet. When the last families left and the volunteers started cleaning up, Nia found him standing by the doorway. "Can we sit outside for a bit?" she asked. He nodded, and they stepped out together into the fading evening light. She didn't speak for a while. She just took it in, all of it, like she was memorizing what hope looked like. They sat on the concrete steps out front, each holding a cup of melting ice cream, watching as the sky darkened into twilight. Nia leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let out a slow breath. For once, he didn't feel like he had to fix anything or prove anything. He just had to be there. I think we made something good, she said, her voice calm but full. He looked down at her, at the bracelet still around her wrist, at the girl who had once scrubbed the floor of his office like survival depended on it. We did, he said quietly. And then, after a beat, you didn't just change my life, Nia, you saved it. She didn't answer with words. She just stayed where she was, resting against him. And that was enough. Because everything he had now, everything he'd come to understand about love, about belonging, about what truly mattered, had started the night he found her, and she looked up at him without asking for anything. The Carter Center stood behind them, glowing softly through the windows. It was more than a building. It was a promise, and sitting on those steps, Gabriel knew it had already begun to keep it. Gabriel and Nia sat together on the steps of the new center, and he knew she hadn't just changed his life, she had saved it. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe to Rod's Stories, and leave a comment telling us what part hit you the hardest. And if someone came to mind while you were watching, send this video to them. They might need this story too.